Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. The global number of coronavirus infections has surpassed 150 million with over 3.1 million deaths. Meanwhile, India has reported the world's highest single-day COVID-19 cases for the third consecutive day. The country has recorded more than 386,000 cases and nearly 3,500 deaths overnight. In Pakistan, 131 people have lost their lives to the virus and more than 5,100 tested positive since yesterday. Hungary has lauded Pakistan's role in maintaining stability in the region amid the Afghan crisis. Addressing Pakistan-Hungary Economic Diplomacy Conference along with his Pakistani counterpart Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó vowed to expand bilateral trade. Both sides also signed a number of MOUs for cooperation in different fields. Iran has welcomed Saudi Arabia's peace gesture and hoped they can work together to secure peace. In a statement, Foreign Ministry said the important regional players can start revisiting tense relations through constructive dialogue. Earlier in an interview, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called for a good relationship with Tehran. At least 44 people have been crushed to death in a stampede at a religious festival in the northeast of Israel. The National Emergency Service says over 150 others were injured as tens of thousands were attending the Lag Bomer festival. Emergency officials say 38 of those injured are in critical condition. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has postponed the parliamentary elections amid a dispute over voting in occupied East Jerusalem. At a press conference, Abbas blamed Israel for uncertainty about whether it will allow voting in the occupied territories. Meanwhile, Hamas has rejected the postponement, terming it a coup against the path of national consensus. The elections were set to take place on 22nd of May after 16 years. Well, these were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. The global number of coronavirus infections has surpassed 150 million, with over 3.1 million deaths. Meanwhile, India has reported the world's highest single-day cases for the third consecutive day. The country recorded more than 386,000 cases and nearly 3,500 deaths overnight. More in this report. The global confusion and disorder sowed by the coronavirus pandemic are peaking with the raging third wave. Hours after France outlined plans to gradually reopen, the country detected its first cases of the variant ravaging India. As the UK enjoys a successful vaccination campaign, experts warn that India-linked variants can become the country's second most dominant within weeks. In Turkey, thousands of people fled big cities hours before a full lockdown went into effect for 17 days. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has warned European governments against relaxing restrictions. Over in Brazil, coronavirus-linked deaths have crossed 400,000 as the country struggles with its inoculations.
This whole scenario contributes to the worsening of the scenario. Because when you do not follow the pharmacological measures, what are you going to do? Have an intense circulation of people, increasing the risk of more serious variants than those already are circulating, predominantly in the young. As the elderly population has been immunized with at least one dose, I predict quite a dramatic landscape.
Meanwhile, the first US military plane has brought emergency coronavirus supplies to help India battle a deadly surge. For over 2 weeks now, India has been breaking daily case records amid a fatal oxygen shortage. Mass migration after the lockdowns in big cities has sparked fears of the virus spreading to smaller towns and villages. People in rural regions are lining up to refill oxygen cylinders outside factories as hospitals struggle to treat coronavirus patients.
My sister passed away on April 23rd and my brother's condition is very bad. No one is giving any information from the oxygen manufacturing facility. How will we get oxygen? Do we have to bring money? Only people with higher access and who they know are getting oxygen, while we stand here for hours, but no one is talking to us.
In New Zealand, despite living in one of the world's few countries to have largely returned to normal, people are still reporting a negative impact on mental health and income from the pandemic. Pakistan has reported 131 coronavirus deaths and more than 5,100 cases overnight. The Health Ministry says the death toll has risen to 17,811. More than 820,000 people have contracted the virus since the pandemic began. Meanwhile, more than 711,000 people have recovered. The number of active cases has crossed 91,000 and nearly 5,400 are critical. The positivity ratio stands at 10.41%. Meanwhile, advisor to the Prime Minister Faisal Sultan says Pakistan will receive over 15 million vaccines in the next 2 months. 13 million have been procured from China, while 2.4 million shots will arrive through the COVAX program. The White House says U.S. troops have begun withdrawing from Afghanistan. Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said these actions will initially result in increased forces levels. Talking to reporters, he said the U.S. remains committed to have all military personnel out of Afghanistan by September 11th. Meanwhile, according to media reports, NATO has also started the drawdown. NATO officials warned that any Taliban attack during the withdrawal will be given a forceful response. Meanwhile, over 100 Afghan security personnel have been killed during the last 2 weeks amid a rise in violence. Officials say around 65 civilians and over 300 Taliban fighters have also been killed. Iran has welcomed Saudi Arabia's peace gesture and hoped they can work together to secure peace. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson made the remarks days after Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called for good relations with Tehran. In a press briefing, Saeed Khatibzadeh said important regional players can start revisiting tense relations through constructive dialogue. He said Iran is playing a pioneering role in enhancing regional cooperation by presenting proposals like the Hormuz Peace Plan. Meanwhile, ending a regional tour, Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said there are indications of positive signs on the horizon. Israel has warned Iran of consequences in case of a bad nuclear deal between Tehran and the world powers. In an interview, Intelligence Minister Eli Cohen said Tel Aviv will not allow Tehran to attain nuclear arms. He said that Israeli planes can reach everywhere in the Middle East, even Iran. Earlier, Iran noted promising developments in the ongoing nuclear deal revival talks in Vienna. But the talks have been overshadowed by an explosion at Iran's nuclear enrichment plant. Tehran had blamed Israel for the attack. Italy's 44 people have been crushed to death in a stampede at a religious festival in the northeast of Israel. Medics say over 150 others were injured as tens of thousands were attending the Lag Bomer festival. The National Emergency Service said 38 of those injured are in critical condition. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described the incident as a terrible disaster. Organizers estimated 100,000 people gathered, despite warnings from the authorities about the COVID-19 risk. Police spokesperson Eli Levy said despite calls to evacuate the site, some celebrants had refused to leave or tried to make their way back.
I was there and inside the Bonfire Festival. It was crowded and there were around 60,000 to 70,000 people. No place to move, and people started to fall to the ground. A lot fell to the ground.
The Mount Meron tomb is considered to be one of the holiest sites in the Jewish world where pilgrims gather annually. And now moving on, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has postponed the parliamentary elections amid a dispute over voting in occupied East Jerusalem. At a press conference, Abbas blamed Israel for uncertainty about whether it will allow voting in the occupied territories. Abbas said Palestinians in Jerusalem will not give up their democratic rights. He added Israelis threatened to detain Palestinian Elections Commission chairman if he visited Jerusalem for preparations. Meanwhile, Hamas has rejected the postponement, terming it a coup against the path of national consensus. Talking to Reuters, Hamas spokesperson said the Fatah movement bears responsibility for the consequences of this position. The elections were set to take place on the 22nd of May after 16 years. Kyrgyzstan says 13 of its citizens have been killed in border clashes with Tajikistan. Health Ministry says 134 residents were wounded in the fighting. The clashes started on April 28 after residents on both sides of the border started throwing stones at each other. The situation rapidly escalated, leading to Kyrgyz and Tajik forces exchanging gunfire in the Batkan region. However, the two countries' foreign ministries have announced they have agreed to a ceasefire. In a statement, Kyrgyz Foreign Ministry said the armed forces will return to their bases. The United Nations says the COVID-19 crisis and coup can push up to 12 million people in Myanmar into poverty. In a report, UNDP warned nearly half the population will live below the national poverty line by 2022. It also strongly condemned the killing of civilians and called for a strongly international response to the crisis. Meanwhile, protesters have yet again taken to the streets against the military regime in Mandalay. The Karen Peace Support Network says 8,000 more ethnic villagers are poised to cross into Thailand. Thai officials say more than 2,000 civilians have already escaped to Bangkok. Activists say security forces have killed at least 759 protesters since the February 1st coup. The European Parliament has called on the bloc to impose new sanctions on Russians suspected of fraud and graft. In a resolution, lawmakers accused the Kremlin of poisoning an external threat to European security. They also said Russian funds of unclear origin must be banned from the EU. The resolution was adopted with 569 in favor, 67 against, and 46 abstentions. It said the EU must exclude Russia from the international payments network if it launches any incursions into Ukraine. The resolution was welcomed by Ukraine, with Kiev terming it a much-needed signal to warn Moscow against aggression. In the United States, at least 5 people have been killed after a 13-hour standoff in the state of North Carolina. Police said 2 deputies were fatally wounded at the basement of the home in Watauga County. The 32-year-old suspect was identified as Alton Barnes. Police says he killed his mother and stepfather before taking his own life. The motive for the shooting remains unclear. North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper says he spoke with the sheriff to offer support and express his condolences. Kenya has told the UN that it will shut down 2 camps holding over 400,000 refugees by June next year. It gave the United Nations 2 weeks to present a plan to carry this out. In a tweet, the Interior Ministry said it has planned to repatriate some and give others residency. The UN Refugee Agency replied by asking Nairobi to ensure vulnerable refugees remain safe under its timeline. Earlier this month, a Kenyan court ruled against the closure of the camps. A call center consultant from Scotland has taken remote working to the next level. He has set up his office across the cliffside over the Irish Sea. Details in this report. Digital nomad is one of the pandemic-induced phenomena to the working habits. The term refers to the people who use technology to work from wherever connectivity is possible. Jason Griffin, a 34-year-old consultant from Glasgow, has temporarily set up his office on a portal edge. Griffin says as long as he has a mobile connection and his laptop, he has everything he needs to do his job as good as, if not better than, if he were in a busy office.
Today we are pushing the technology to its limits because we're going over a cliff face and we're abseiling down to a ledge, and I will be working all day from that ledge and taking and making calls, interacting with internal staff while I sit there at this ledge on the side of a cliff, just showing that remote literally means remote.
As per a survey published on April 1st, more employers in Britain think working from home is increasing the productivity of their staff. The Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development says a third of employers think remote working has boosted their output, up from 28% in last June. However, it remains to be seen how permanent the shift to working from home proves to be.
We all saw the digital tsunami coming, but we didn't see the biological tsunami in the form of COVID-19. And in many respects, COVID-19 is the unofficial closing ceremony to the industrial era. So remote work was always on the cards as we move towards the gig economy. COVID has just accelerated it by about a decade.
Global accountancy firm KPMG's survey indicates that most major companies no longer plan to reduce their office space after the pandemic, though few expect business to return to normal this year. Asia-Pacific stocks have declined amid uncertainty about the prospect for a global economic recovery from the pandemic. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is leading the losses, falling over 1%. Japan's Nikkei 225 mainland Chinese shares and the ASX 200 in Australia all slipped marginally. Seoul's Kospi has also shed over 0.5%. Now it's time to have a look at the weather update across the globe. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.